A man lets a demon take control of his body and then he commits a horrible crime, a knife versus hammer fight inspired by the devil, and a group of Satanists turned cannibals. All of this on today's most amazing top 10 list, and without taking any longer, let's get into this list. Coming in number 10, we have Arn Johnson. Let's scoot back over to the year 1980 for the story of Arn Johnson. The police received a phone call that a man had been stabbed to death. That man was Alan Bono. It didn't take long for the police to link the murder back to one of Bono's tenants, Arn Johnson. The two were seen together the night of the murder. The two of them were drinking, and it turns out Johnson had far too much to drink. After a disagreement, he flew into a blind rage and stabbed his landlord to death. After his arrest, he had a very interesting defense. He said that a few days before this had happened, he had come across a 12-year-old boy, and this kid was struggling because the devil had taken control of his soul. In an effort to save the boy, Johnson performed an exorcism on the child and told the devil that he could take control of his own body and leave the poor kid alone. While under the devil's influence, Johnson then killed his former landlord, Alan Bono. Now, the jury thought this was a very interesting defense, but they didn't buy it, but it did get him out of a murder charge. He ended up going to prison for manslaughter. Coming in at number 9, we have Cody Lott. Cody was a troubled young man, and it seemed that whatever was going on in his head would get the better of him in September of 2016. He drove up on a mother and child walking down the street and opened fire on them out of nowhere. The daughter, Michaela Smith, would survive the shooting, but her mother, Lauren Landavazo, would be killed. Once the police arrived on the scene, it didn't take long for them to track down Cody Lott with the help of Smith, who was obviously an eyewitness and a victim of this horrible crime. After Lott was apprehended and his trial began, he stated that he committed this crime because he had a jealous rage about the fact that Landavazo had a boyfriend and he struggled horribly with women. But on top of this, he said that the devil helped him plot out and execute this murder. After the trial, Lott was sentenced to life in prison. Coming in at number 6, we have Son of Sam. Probably one of the most famous high-profile possession murder cases to come out of the United States. Son of Sam was a serial killer in the 1980s who preyed on women. His disdain for women grew when he found out that his adoptive mother was actually his real mother, and for some reason she told him that he was adopted and unwanted. He would stalk women in the night and shoot them to death. When he was arrested, he claimed that he was possessed by a demon, and even after he was arrested, there was a point where he freaked out and tried to jump out a window but was restrained, and he claimed that in that moment the demon took control of his body. No one was really buying this, but he has stuck to this story of being controlled by a demon for decades. Sometimes he slips, but he always comes back to the same story, claiming that he's innocent and was not in control of his body at the time of the murders. Coming in at number 5, we have Pazuzu Algarad. You know when a guy picks a new name, and that name came from the movie The Exorcist, that you are in for some trouble. Pazuzu was the name of the demon in The Exorcist, and a man in North Carolina seemed to have some sort of connection to it. He was arrested when 2 murders were connected to both him and his girlfriend. Algarad went out of his way to make his body look demonic. He had body modifications done to have a forked tongue and sharpened teeth. But let's just backtrack for a moment. This dude looks like the Babadook, he is killing people, and he has a girlfriend. Okay, that all makes sense. Algarad claimed to be controlled by demons and did their bidding. On full moons, he would sacrifice small animals, cut out their hearts, and eat them. That does not sound like the Friday night party I want to get invited to. Coming in at number 4, we have Nico Jenkins. Back in 2017, the final sentencing was given out to Nico Jenkins. 4 years prior to his sentencing, he went on a 10-day killing spree where he took the lives of 4 different people. It was a horrific case by any standards. Jenkins had a long history of mental illness, and this played a definite factor in why he did what he did. During his trial, he talked a lot about voices and even claimed that demons were inside him and influenced him to commit his crimes, but he didn't seem to have any sort of remorse for what he did. It seemed that he thought that all the people he killed deserved to die. This case was terrifying. After everything was said and done, a panel of judges gave Nico Jenkins the death penalty, and even if he's never even taken to lethal injection, he must serve over 400 years in prison. So unless this guy can find some way to break out or extend his life expectancy, he's going to be gone forever. Coming in at number 3, we have Sean Sellers. The story of Sean Sellers is horrific. You would think that no one is born evil, but Sean seemed to be too far gone right from the get-go. When he was only 15 years old, he started reading the Satanic Bible from front to back almost every day, and he even claimed he would drink his own blood. Sean ended up shooting a clerk at a convenience store, but this is where his lust for blood just started. He eventually wanted more and would end up killing both of his parents. When he was interviewed about this, he said that he would see demons flying above their heads and he would constantly get advice from these demons.
Starting us off with number 10 is Satan's Enigma. Back in August of 1676, 31-year-old Sister Maria Crucifissa della Concisione was found dead in her cell hell. Also, can we get a slow clap to me for even pronouncing that correctly? Yeah. Her face was covered in ink and she was found holding a letter written in a code that took centuries to decipher. Maria said the devil wrote the letter to try and get her away from the path of God. The letter that featured 14 lines translated to this: God thinks he can free mortals, the system works for no one, perhaps now Styx is certain. In Roman and Greek mythology, the river Styx separates the living world from the netherworld. Maria was also said to have bipolar disorder or schizophrenia and was fighting against numerous evil spirits. I feel like the message had to be written by her while she was possessed or something, because after the fact, her behavior at the convent became very bizarre, and it's like, hello, Sister Maria, what you doing? But what does the letter even mean? It took centuries to decode, surely it's important, but I feel like it just got decoded and no one cares. Coming in at number 9 is Sister Madeleine de Demondol. So back in 1611, there occurred a series of demonic possessions amongst the Ursuline nuns of Aix-en-Provence. 17-year-old aristocrat Madeleine entered the convent after having admitted she had had a relationship with Father Louis Graffiti. She was then sent to Aix to get away from Father Louis, but by 1608, things got ugly. The girl started showing signs of being possessed. She would shake, convulse, and it seemed to be contagious since the other nuns started doing the same. So many exorcism attempts were undertaken, but nothing was successful. In 1610, the exorcisms were still going on, and it was like the girls were all in competition with each other, like who was the most possessed. Like, oh, you can speak in tongues in Latin? Well, I can levitate, so there's that. Now, they all had their own demon personalities, and it was suspected that Father Louis had seduced Madeleine and caused her to become possessed. Almost all the nuns involved had some sort of infatuation with Father Louis. He was later tortured, wherein he confessed to having a pact with the devil, after which he was killed via strangulation and being burned. I mean, I'm not gonna say he low-key deserved it, but he high-key deserved it. At number 8, we have the Ursuline nuns. The case of Father Louis and those Ursuline nuns foreshadowed the events, including Father Urbain Ranzy, a Roman Catholic priest that lived in the Loudun part of France. He was under major scrutiny and received a lot of criticism for ignoring his celibacy vow, and if anything, he was known for having sexual relations with many women, and as someone who had an elevated sense of lustful depravity. By 1632, he was accused of sending the demon Asmodai to enchant a group of Ursuline nuns into committing evil acts and becoming his sex slaves. Mother Superior Jeanne d'Agnes claimed she had demonic dreams that Grandier was in, as well as visions of people that had already died. After numerous nuns had similar experiences, they all accused him of seduction and witchcraft, and he was arrested, then acquitted, and then re-arrested. During the second arrest, he was tortured by judges, after which they revealed a contract they found in his bedroom, which indicated he had signed a deal with Satan and many other demons. They saw it as evidence of him making a diabolical pact and convicted him of witchcraft and sentenced him to death. He was burnt at the stake, and rightfully so. Now at number 6 are the Louvier possessions. A lot of nun possessions going on in France in the 1600s, let me tell you that much. So back in 1625, Sister Madeleine Savant was said to be the first possession victim at the hands of Father Pickard, who apparently gave her magic potions and also got her pregnant. Do none of these people take celibacy seriously? Like, what is the point then? What is the point? Now, the possession occurred after his death, and she told authorities 2 men had kidnapped her and taken her to a witch's sabbat where she married the devil and had sex with him. Her confession made other nuns come forward too, who claimed that Father Pickard had taken them to secret sabbats for the same thing. The nuns would contort in unnatural shapes, speak in tongues, be uncontrollably violent, and shout obscenities like there was no tomorrow. Now, the Loudun possessions the decade before made this all not really that surprising, but the hysteria made it super public. All the exorcisms were seen by everyone, and eventually Madeleine was imprisoned for life and Father Pickard's body was exhumed and then burned. Cause even in death, we gon' burn your body. Coming in at number 5 is Benedetta. The book The Devil Within recounts the history of demonic possession and features a story of a nun called Benedetta. Back in 1619, Benedetta was interrogated to find out why she had engaged in a bunch of sexual acts with another nun called Bartolomea. She exclaimed that a male angel called Splendiletto had possessed her and would speak in his voice. But whenever she became him, it seemed like he was more demonic than he was angelic. Anytime it was him speaking, Benedetta was a lot more maniacal and lewd. But also, was she really possessed by a demonic entity, or was she just a scared closeted lesbian who didn't know what else to do? Filling at number 3 slot are 2 Fingers. This is another story featured in The Devil Within, and it gave me very Reagan from The Exorcist vibes. Apparently there was a nun at this French commune called Auxonne who got possessed. Again, there's only like 2 nuns on this list who aren't French, which is highly suspicious. What is it about French nuns that make them more susceptible to getting demonically possessed? Like, damn, Poppy. Anyway, during her possession, this nun apparently held up a giant heavy marble vase full of holy water. Now that sounds like a perfectly nunnish thing to do, except for the fact she lifted the entire thing with only 2 fingers. Now at number 2 is Valak, maybe the most infamous possessed nun to exist, even if she is just a fictional character in the Conjuring universe. However, what's not fictional is the demon Valak, who's described in the Lesser Key of Solomon grimoires. Valak as a demon can control, locate, and summon serpents at will, which is quite dangerous yet cool power to have if you ask me. In the movie, the duke that built the castle that is now the monastery was obsessed with the occult and summoned Valak himself back in the day, who took the form of the nun. Obviously in the movie, the demon has more abilities like telepathy, shape-shifting, and the ability to block clairvoyance. Valak kills all the nuns in the monastery and toys with Sister Irene by making her believe she's in the monastery with a bunch of other nuns, when really she's all alone, and Valak had already killed them all. And finally, at number 1 is Sister Magdalena de la Cruz. This Franciscan Spanish nun was actually honored as a living saint for a very long time. At 5 years old, Magdalena was known for her hardcore devotion to God and for the fact people thought she saw Jesus. She would have mystic heavenly visions, but with heavenly apparitions, there are also demonic ones to go with them. At some point, her heavenly visions slowed down, or the diabolical ones took over, because it said she made a pact with the devil. She goes on to become abbess of her convent, which is good since everyone wanted her to be, but bad since she was severe in her acts of penance and ordered her sisters to do the same. Magdalena would scare the other sisters and force them to confess to severe sins. Some would cry, but others went to a possessed state where they'd roll on the floor and contort their bodies before eventually going back to normal. She encouraged the nuns to use iron-tipped whips to self-inflict penance on themselves, and all this while she was being guided by the devil himself. In 1543, she falls extremely ill, and it's then that the priest suspects that she's possessed by a demon, so she started convulsing when trying to confess. The Inquisitor is brought in, and she reveals that all those years ago when everyone thought she had a vision of Jesus, it was actually the devil that she met. He had promised her fame and respect as long as she would obey him always, and so she agreed at 5 years old. Starting us off at number 10 is Son of Sam, aka David Berkowitz. Now I listened to a 2-hour-long serial killer podcast about him, so I'm very well versed in Mr. Berkowitz. Anyway, David was one of America's most notorious serial killers. He was active between 1976 and 77 and killed 6 women and wounded 7 others in failed murder attempts. His moniker came from his neighbor's dog Sam, who he hated more than anything. Believe me, in the podcast it talked about how much he hated the dog for at least 15 minutes. Like, come on, the episodes aren't that long. He then claimed the dog was possessed by a 6,000-year-old man called Sam who told him to kill people. David was adopted a few days after being born, and his adoptive mother told him his real mother had died during childbirth, which wasn't true, but that caused him to hate himself growing up. When he found out that that wasn't true in his teens, he started loathing women, and hence his victims ended up being all girls. David shot all his victims, trying to go for the headshot but not always getting it. When he was eventually arrested, he pleaded not guilty because of insanity and possession, but they rejected that and said he was fully competent. 2 weeks after his 25 to life sentence, he tried to jump out of a 7th floor window and was restrained but kept shouting Stacy was a I'd kill her again, I'd kill them all again. He then went on to retract his statement saying he was possessed, but in his later prison diaries, he wrote about how he was scared Sam would evolve into a human or demon in a more complete state. He's gone back and forth on his possession story so many times, so till this day, no one is truly sure whether he was possessed or he wasn't. At number 8, we have the trial of Anne Cheyenne Johnson. Now this was the first case in America to use the devil made me do it defense in a murder trial, so it's a pretty big deal. Back in 1981, Johnson went for dinner with his fiancée Debbie and then landlord Alan Bono and a few others. All of a sudden, Johnson started stabbing Bono with a pocket knife and he ultimately died in the restaurant. In his trial, Johnson pleaded not guilty because he claimed he was possessed when the murder took place and cited his connection with Debbie's brother David and called the Warrens to the trial to testify. And by Warrens, I mean Ed and Lorraine Warren, the paranormal investigators and authors. A year earlier, David had started seeing demons that looked a bit like the thing from Insidious, and there was no explanation for all the bruises and scratches that were found on his body. Johnson and Debbie enlisted the help of a priest, but this only angered the spirit even more, who then made David speak in multiple voices and hiss at them. He said he felt like he was being choked by something and he had red marks on his neck despite no one having touched him. They called the Warrens, who dispelled the demons from the boy's body, but then they all went into Anne's body instead. After teaming up with the Diocese of Bridgeport ritual and some priests, they got rid of 40 demons in Ans's body. In the end though, the court still found him guilty of first-degree manslaughter. Yikes. I feel like how though, like 40 demons? Clearly the guy's not at fault. Filling our number 7 slot is Tommy Smith. Back in Feb of 2015, 17-year-old Tommy was having an absolute nightmare of a day. 65-year-old Peter Chern drove a Range Rover, and that day Tommy wanted nothing more but the keys to his car and was prepared to steal them to get them. While he was attempting to break into the car, Peter came up from behind him to try and stop him, and Smith lost it. He pulled out his knife and stabbed Peter in the neck, the heart, chest, arms, back, everywhere. The stabbing frenzy was so haphazard that he actually broke the knife in half. Keep in mind, Tommy was very troubled. He had already been convicted of 57 offenses, but the poor boy had also been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, which is a huge detail that turns this whole case around. The next year, Tommy went on trial for attempted murder, and he pled insanity and claimed a demon had possessed him the day of the incident. And I don't know if he was possessed, but I do know that mental disorder can really make you believe horrible things that aren't real. The court didn't believe him, but because of his diagnosis, he was cleared for murder but convicted for burglary and bodily harm. Guys, the miraculous part of all of this is the fact that Peter actually survived. He was sat in that courtroom with one eye watching his assailant be sent to a mental hospital for the rest of his life. Peter, you were a trooper. Now at number 6 is the couple. So back in 2002, Danielle and Manuela Reda, a self-proclaimed Satanist couple, did something horrible. The couple had traveled to Scotland and England and learned about the occult and Satanism there, and that's when things started going wrong. The couple chose their friend Frank Hackett to sacrifice since he was quite funny, and they thought he'd be hell's perfect court jester. Wow, not a good time to be funny. They proceeded to stab him 66 times during the ritual and were wearing very over-the-top costumes. Daniel claimed the couple wasn't responsible for the murder since they were simply acting on the devil's orders, which were kill, sacrifice, bring souls. Apparently Satan had been watching the incident take place and was just stood there smiling. News of the murder only came after Manuela sent a letter to her mum saying, "I am not of this world, I must liberate my soul from the mortal flesh." Manuela, what the hell does that mean? Are you Satan immortalized? Either way, the couple was convicted and found guilty, so that's that. Coming in at number 5 is Dorothy Talby. So this may be one of the earliest American cases of trialing an insane person, if not the earliest one. Back in 1638, Dorothy Talby was known as a polite, respectable woman, you know, part of the Salem church, had a 3-year-old daughter, was quite trustworthy. But slowly, over time, she started becoming depressed and would burst into fits of anger and violence. Dorothy became delusional and tried to kill her own husband at one point, and during another fit, she refused to eat meat because God had apparently told her that meat was from Satan. Eventually, after refusing help, she was cast out of the church and bound to a post and whipped until she changed her way of thinking. The woman was possessed by some demon or another because then in November of that year she killed her daughter Difficulty by breaking her neck. Yes, her name was Difficulty. We don't need to joke about that, even though I've made many jokes in my head. We don't joke about the dead. Now Dorothy confessed at her trial after being threatened to be stoned, but keep in mind back then there was no difference between criminal behavior and insanity. Law was more biblical, so the punishment for murder was death. An eye for an eye. Puritan Governor John Winthrop said death was the only way for her since she was possessed by Satan himself. At number 4 is Michael Taylor. This one is a bit gruesome, so prepare yourselves, people. Michael Taylor became known after the Ossett murder case. He lived in Ossett with his wife Christine, and both belonged to a Christian fellowship group. Slowly but surely, Michael started displaying erratic and socially distant behavior, which is never a promising sign, is it? Like, that's never good. In one meeting at the church, Christine accused him of cheating on her with the leader of the group, Marie Robinson, to which he reacted by verbally attacking her and Marie. His behavior declined further, and he admitted that he felt evil within him, and then it was decided he had to be seen by some priests. Well, go figure, you've gone a bit loony, mate. His exorcism took all night, and they managed to pull 40 demons from his body, but several still stayed inside him. After a long holy night, they sent him home hoping for the best, but then he proceeded to violently murder Christine by tearing her eyes and tongue out, almost tearing her face off completely, and then strangling the family poodle to death. What did the poodle do? Like, honestly, what did the poodle do? He was arrested after authorities found Taylor wandering the streets naked and covered in blood. During his trial, he pleaded insanity and was sent to Broadmoor for a while, but upon his release, he got arrested again for touching a teen indecently. So, all in all, Michael's life just hasn't been great. Filling at number 3 slot is Sean Sellers Part 1. So some people are really the spawn of Satan, and 16-year-old Sean is definitely his favorite child. So back in September of 1985, Sean murdered a convenience store clerk called Robert Bauer, while his best friend Richard Howard just stood there and watched. When giving his testimony during Sean's trial, he said Sean did it because he wanted to see what it feels like to kill somebody. Okay, Robert, and you just sat there and watched? You just let him act on that and let him kill someone? You were the friend your parents asked, like, oh, would you just follow them if they jumped off a cliff? You are that friend who jumps off the cliff. Idiot. Now, the following year in March, Sean went on to shoot his mum and stepdad to death with a handgun and did so in his underwear so blood wouldn't get on his clothes. He staged the whole thing to look like an intruder had done it, but we know by now that these setups always get exposed. And thus, that was very much the end of Sean's free life. But let's think about this. A lot of factors led to Sean ending up the way he did and his instability. His mum Vonda was 16 when she had him, and his dad was an alcoholic who then abandoned the family when Sean was only 3. He was physically by his mum and granddad constantly while growing up, and his uncle would always make him wear his dirty diapers on his head. His mum then married a truck driver named Paul to try and bring some stability into everyone's lives, but that really didn't help. By the time Sean was 16, the family had moved cities over 30 times. But wait, there's more. Now at number 2 is Sean Sellers Part 2. Now apparently while he was in high school, he drank his own blood during satanic rituals. He said flying demons were influencing him, and he brought the satanic Bible to every single one of his classes. He even wrote this in his own blood: I renounce God, I renounce Christ, I will serve only Satan to my enemy's death. When the murder trial came for his parents, Sean claimed his demon alter ego Azurat was controlling him during all the murders, and thus he had no control over his actions. Between the ages of 15 and 16, he had read the satanic Bible hundreds of times. He was eventually killed via lethal injection in 1999, so goodbye and good riddance, Sean. And finally, at number 1 is Elizbieta Plakowska. This one really broke my heart because you can just tell how deeply disturbed this woman really was. So back in October of 2012, Naperville native Elizbieta started hearing voices in her head telling her that his son Justin and his friend Olivia were both possessed by demons. The voices kept telling her that killing them was the only way to salvation, so she did it. Olivia was spending the night at their house, and so she went and stabbed Justin 100 times and Olivia 50 times. She didn't just kill them, she killed the family dog and Olivia's dog too. And simultaneously, she herself was apparently possessed by some black shadow entity, and she actually told police it was an unknown stalker that had killed the two. When she finally went to trial, she pled not guilty due to insanity, and her defense team claimed she had had a psychotic break the night of the terrible events. In the end, she was sentenced to life for the 2 murders and 1 count of animal cruelty. Like, I get the voices were telling her that the kids were possessed, but they said nothing about the dogs, so why would she kill them? Just let them free, open the door, let them run away.
Number 10. Richard Ramirez. Okay, here we go, right off the hop. Richard, who is also known as the Night Stalker, he was a serial killer who terrorized the streets of LA back in the 80s. He was known for, invading homes, which left him initially being dubbed as the walk-in killer, but he had another signature that was concerning to many people as well, especially during the height of the satanic panic. This is not good. Richard was known for leaving behind different satanic messages at the scene of his crimes. Because of his satanic signature, after he left his first pentagram at the scene of a crime, authorities became worried that he was just a Charles Manson copycat, but instead he was, his own kind of monster. Nice. It is said that he would leave more pentagrams behind while also telling his victims to swear to Satan instead of swearing to God. During his court appearances, he would hold up a pentagram, and after pleading not guilty, he said, "Hail Satan." Yep, it would appear otherwise, my friend. Okay. Number 9. John Dee. John Dee was a scientist from the mid-1500s. Okay, we're going way back for this next one. In Elizabethan fashion, the scientist also fancied the occult, because I guess they were all bored back then. He worked alongside Edward Kelly. Now at the time, John Dee was working in the court of Queen Elizabeth I. To show you what kind of role he played in, a functioning society, John Dee casted an astrological chart in order to determine when the queen should be crowned. Yeah, he was one of those guys. So cut to 1581, both John Dee and Edward Kelly both claimed to communicate to the other side via crystal balls. Eventually the town wasn't cool with this guy speaking to angels or demons, because yeah, surprise surprise, not everyone's on board with that, what'd you know? So the queen sent him to Manchester. She's like, get out of here. But when he arrived, he was warden of Manchester Collegiate Church. John Dee refused to be part of exorcisms, but a table with an odd demonic bird mark found afterwards. So he's been busy, it seems. This mark is said to be from the hoof of the devil when John Dee summoned him. The British Museum still has John's demonic obsidian mirror if you want to take a peek yourself and see, you know, how those curls are doing. Number 8, Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey is one of the most well-known serial killers, with his crimes taking place from 1978 all the way to 1991. His crimes are far too brutal to really get into, but he's known for taking the lives of 17 different people. Now at his trial, not only did he plead not guilty, but his attorney had some interesting words for the court. His attorney stated that his bloody pattern had caused him to believe that he was the devil, which was intended to, you know, bolster his insanity plea. His attorney said that he became enamored, overwhelmed, even caught up in the character from the movie The Exorcist 3. Yeah, said character was Satan. Yeah, if you're thinking, oh, which one? Is it the neighbor? No, the devil. Not only was Jeffrey found to be sane and ended up being sentenced to multiple life sentences in prison, of course, but not too long after his sentence started, he was killed by a fellow inmate. Number 7, Louis Garavito. Louis gained a nickname from the media called the Beast, so that's gonna tip you off of where this one's gonna go. Louis is said to be one of the worst serial killers of all time, and it's believed that his victim count is somewhere in the 300s. That is brutal. Now he's confessed to 147 crimes, and he was found guilty on 139 of them, which puts his sentence at 1,853 years. But here's the thing, his trial took place in Colombia, of course where he lives, and there's a law there which puts the maximum sentence to only 30 years. So yeah, he shaved a couple hundred off of that, I guess. He was sentenced in 1999, so you can do a little bit of quick math there. And according to Louis himself, he committed these crimes because he had made a deal with the devil, and he explained that a satanic ritual was involved in all of his crimes. Number 6, H.H. Holmes. He's considered America's first serial killer, and he was especially gruesome. H.H. went to medical school, and shortly after finishing, he began killing people in order to steal their property. He built himself a huge, horrifying house that he'd built to include things like secret passages, trapdoors, soundproof rooms, doors that lock from the outside with gas jets on the inside. He even had a kiln to cremate the bodies. Not only would he get close to women to take control of their finances and then, you know, ultimately kill them, but he would also require his employees to take out life insurance policies that named him as the beneficiary. It isn't exactly known how many victims he had, but it's thought to be somewhere over 200. He was sentenced to death when he was finally caught, and it's said before his execution, he famously said, "I was born with the very devil inside me." Number 5, Sam Little. Known for being one of the worst serial killers in history, Sam Little has confessed to taking the lives of more than 90 people, and while authorities have only been able to, you know, connect him to 30 officially, they say they have no reason to doubt the other ones are probably true as well. Sam was able to continue this horrible path for so many years because of the fact that he committed these crimes in different states and different countries, which made it, of course, difficult to connect his crimes to one another. He was too fast. He changed his name a lot, and that's obviously hard. In an interview with an investigator named Sergeant LeBlanc, they discussed religious beliefs, and they spoke about the nature of sin. Here comes the devil stuff, you know? You're like, okay, when does it get to the devil stuff? Now. During the interview, of course, Sam stated he had no fear of God and even said that God made him this way, so why should he ask for forgiveness? He said that God knew everything he did, and he also allegedly told a few select people that he believed that he himself was the devil. Number 4, Ronald DeFeo. Moving on to another case that inspired more Hollywood horror. If you've seen the Amityville Horror, in some ways this should ring some sad bells. Although the movie adds a lot of paranormal aspects that was not present in reality. Or was it? No one's really sure. That's the main argument nowadays. Ronald was charged and convicted of taking the lives of his entire family. Last year he passed away in jail at the age of 69. After his passing, certain letters that he had written were released. Before his death, Ronald had given many different accounts of what happened on that fateful night, which has made it now impossible for anyone to follow or really understand how it happened. Ronald himself stated there was no demon. You know who the demon is. It's me. I am the demon. So does this mean he wasn't in fact possessed, or he is at the time? Somebody saying they're a demon certainly doesn't help their case. I don't know. Number 3, David Berkowitz. Also known as the son of Sam, David Berkowitz is a killer who again thinks that he works for the devil. Now this time, the real culprit for the horrible crimes was a demon who had taken the shape of a dog that belonged to his neighbor. That was the said demon that made David do it. He led authorities on one of the largest manhunts ever seen after this in New York, and in true twisted killer fashion, he left notes behind. Yeah, trying to be arrogant, thinking he would never get caught. You know, working at 9 to 5 in the underworld, you'd think there'd be more places to duck out and hide, but David was caught and convicted. He later admitted to making up the dog story, but he did say that instead he was a member of a violent satanic cult and his crimes were committed as part of that. Number 2. Arnie Johnston. This one's a little different because this person didn't claim to be from hell, but rather they had hell inside of them when they committed their atrocious crime, and it wasn't their fault. This trial was well known previously, but has become, of course, more widely spread as it's the trial in the newest Conjuring movie. In 1981, Arnie Cheyenne Johnston killed 40-year-old Alan Bono in what appeared to have been just a simple argument gone wrong quickly and got more twisted and confusing. When it came to his defense for the crime, the devil made him do it. Yeah, just like the third installment in the Conjuring franchise, the title, Devil Made Me Do It, is in direct relation. That was his excuse. This was the first time in history now that possession had been used in an American courtroom as defense. Prior to this, Arnie had been at the scene of about 3 exorcisms that had occurred before this, alleged possession, and this is why there's so many people that believe him. At the end of the day, the jury in the trial decided to convict him of manslaughter. And finally, number 1, Niccolo Paganini. We'll finish off this demonic list with the late Italian composer Niccolo Paganini. This man knew how to play the violin, let me tell you that. Apparently a little too well, some would say. The 18th century icon brought romance to violin technique. He studied with many violinists over his life, but what really explains his skill is the fact that his mother made a deal with the devil when the lad was only 6 years old. Niccolo leaned into these accusations and actually used it so people wouldn't mess with him anymore. They would be afraid of the violin composer, They're like, oh, we don't talk to him. He's like the Doctor Strange violin guy. He fights with music. Thinking back now, I'm like, yeah, I get that. Guy needed to invent romance via a violin. But what if he was? What if he was working for the devil the whole time? The musician passed away at age 36 and there wasn't a single church that would take him. It's pretty rude, but also it's understandable. We'll use your music at the funeral, but we're not gonna bury you. Thanks.
Starting us off with number 10 is Father Dominic Lena. So this priest appears on the much-loved series Supernatural that has been going on for literally like 25 years. What season are they on? 19? I swear to God. So Father Lena was a priest at St. Mary's Convent back in 1972, and while he was there, very bad things happened. One night while closing up the convent, Azazel, the prince of hell, appears out of nowhere and possesses Dominic. The next day, Dominic talks to 8 nuns about his dad Lucifer's life story and his imprisonment before trapping them all in a sanctuary. He then proceeds to kill all of them and places one of their bodies invertedly on the altar. Then Lucifer himself speaks to this nun and tells the priest what he needs to do to free him. After the demon leaves the priest's body, he gets arrested for the murders of the nuns despite him telling them he was possessed when the whole thing happened, like it can't be me. And the police were like, oh yeah right, sure you got possessed, bud. Coming in at number 9 is Padre Pio. Saint Pio of Pietrelcina was an Italian priest, mystic, and now saint who had numerous violent battles with the devil, many of which left him physically wounded and bleeding. One night in 1906, he heard footsteps coming towards his room, and he thought it was one of his friends, so he called out to them, but then soon realized no sound was coming out of his mouth. No matter what he did, he just couldn't speak. He then saw a huge menacing black hand with smoke coming out of his mouth on a window ledge nearby. The dog came into his room and said, "Him it is him," before vanishing. Other encounters involved him being dragged from his bed, being thrown around his room, being spat on. One time he was even left with 3 broken ribs. And Satan would come to him in different forms, like a black cat, as young provocative girls trying to test his celibacy, as his own superiors, or worst of all, in sacred forms. Now what made him such a huge target for Satan was his work as an exorcist. It was said the second possessed people saw him, they would go ballistic, cursing at him, doing God knows what, and just before leaving their body, Satan would say, "Father Pio, do not steal the bodies from us, and we will not bother you." Another attack in 1964 left him with a critically injured spine and various cuts. So no, the priest himself wasn't possessed, but he was Satan's biggest target for possession, which I think counts. At number 8 we have The Rite. This one comes from the 2011 supernatural horror The Rite, which is based off the book of the same name. In the movie, the protagonist Michael decided to leave the seminary after its completion because of lack of faith. Father Matthew, his superior, thinks Michael could be a great priest and tries to talk him out of it, claiming there's such a huge rise in demonic possession cases and that the church really needs more exorcists. So Matthew decides to take an exorcism course at the Vatican, where he meets Father Xavier, who introduces him to an exorcist called Father Lucas. Now I know I just mentioned a lot of father people, but it's fine, you don't have to keep track of all of them, just Father Lucas. He meets Lucas at his home, and one of his patients is also there, a 16-year-old pregnant girl called Rosaria. She had been and then abandoned by her dad, and shows a lot of possessed signs, coughing up nails, somehow speaking English fluently, and more. She then tries to drown herself and ends up hospitalized, where another exorcism is performed. That kills Rosaria and her baby, which sucks for them, but sucks even harder for Father Lucas, who then gets possessed by the same demon who had possessed her. He then eventually gets exorcised by Michael, but imagine the disrespect of getting possessed by the demon you were trying to expel out of someone else. Like, leave me alone. Filling at number 7 slot is The Ultimate Sacrifice. So if you're familiar with the Exorcist franchise, then you've also heard of Father Damien Karras, the troubled priest and psychiatric counselor. Damien interacts with Regan as a psychiatrist, not a priest, and despite seeing a ton of evidence of her possession, he refuses to believe it. After a lot of things happen, he vouches for her to get exorcised, and Lancaster Merrin is the guy who gets to do it. The night of the exorcism, things get out of hand and Merrin tells him to go rest for a while. When Damien finally returns a while later, he finds Merrin dead on the floor and realizes he knows what needs to be done. He volunteers and asks the demon to possess his body instead of Regan's. The demon agrees and possesses Damien right before he jumps out of the window to try and kill himself and rid the world of this horrid demon. At the exact same time of Damien's death, the Gemini killer James Veneman is executed, and his soul goes into Damien's body right before he dies. And of course, a lot more death and murder follow after that. Now at number 6 is David. Jared actually recommended this film to me, and it's quite big, so I don't know how I hadn't heard of it before. The footage-style 2012 film The Devil Inside follows Isabella Rosie, a girl whose mother Maria killed 3 people while being exorcised. 20 years later, Isabella goes to Rome to visit her mum, who is kept in an asylum, and it's clear she's still possessed as hell. Isabella is desperate to help her mum and meets 2 priests, Ben and David, who she tries to enlist to exorcise her mum. Now David is unsure, since the church doesn't allow exorcisms on people unless there's undeniable proof that the person is possessed. I don't know how killing 3 people during an exorcism is an undeniable proof, but okay. The others then persuade the priest to help, and so they go to Maria and start the exorcism. During it, they find out she's possessed by 4 demonic entities, and she somehow transfers some of her demons to David and Isabella unbeknownst to them. Later on, David has to perform a baptism, since he's still a priest at the end of the day. You gotta do priestly stuff. During it though, he holds the baby, says the words, but then submerges it in the water for far too long. Then the crowd runs in to save it, and that's not even the worst part. Ben then goes to see him at home, and he finds David covered in blood. Ben then calls the police. I don't know why he thought they'd help, but they come, and David gets his hands on one of their guns and ends up shooting himself. Coming in at number 5 is Cardinal Patrick Henry Rourke. Now I remember watching Sin City when I was younger and not knowing what the hell was going on. It seemed very cool. I was just utterly clueless on everything that was going on. Like, really. It was just black and white and it was very cool. Now in the first family, the Rourke family is this powerful dynasty in town that essentially gets away with everything. The dad is the senator, the kid, Rourke Jr., is a bloody serial killer, so this family is a lot to handle. When Rourke Jr. is out there killing people, Marv is trying to figure out who's doing it. While investigating, he has time to sleep with Goldie, who then gets murdered that night while he's asleep. Angry as hell, he finds out it was Cardinal Patrick Henry Rourke who arranged for her murder, and so he confronts him and finds out the truth, regrettably. The Cardinal tells him that he and his ward Kevin killed the prostitutes and then ate them in order to consume their souls. Now, I'm sorry, but any Cardinal who's killing and eating people is definitely possessed by some kind of darkness. At number 4 is Father Kinley. From the 4th season of the popular show Lucifer comes the much hated Father Kinley, a priest who serves with the International Association of Exorcists. Chloe essentially meets Father Kinley in an attempt to send Lucifer back to hell, all the while telling Lucifer that they're a team. Girls, am I right? We're going to snake you. Either way, she then has a change of heart and tells Kinley the plan is off, but Kinley goes to Lucifer anyway and tells him of Chloe's peak anime betrayal. Upon further investigation, Chloe and Lucifer find out that the series of murders that had been happening as a subplot were orchestrated by Father Kinley in an attempt to expose Lucifer as the devil. Now his ass goes to jail and he's excommunicated. He's later kidnapped by Eve, and he keeps telling her she should take Lucifer back to hell and then attempts to murder her. She then kills him and summons the demon Dromos and puts him inside Kinley's body. So now we have Father Kinley, RIP, being possessed by Dromos, who's killing other humans so his brother can possess those bodies. Like, I've seen a few episodes of Lucifer on the plane, but it sounds pretty eventful, I'm not gonna lie. Filling at number 3 slot is Reverend Peter Shane. This one actually got me really intrigued in a messed up sort of way. So in the 1984 erotic thriller Crimes of Passion, we meet this fashion design house owner called Joanna, who moonlights as a prostitute named China Blue. Now one of her clients happens to be Reverend Peter Shane, a holy man who visits peep shows, does drugs, preaches sermons, and violates his celibacy on a daily basis. He claims he sees China because he has this need to save her. As the movie progresses, the Reverend gets even more psychotic. He starts carrying a sharp metallic toy in his bag and stalks Joanna. He watches her through a peephole, he sets up a shrine dedicated to her. At this point, everyone knows he's off the rails. Joanna then tries to tell him she doesn't want to see him anymore, but he follows her back home and for some reason begs her to kill him. Now I know Reverend Shane wasn't explicitly possessed by a demon, but most other priests would think his battle with his own demons was clearly lost. He's stalking a woman, he's on the verge of killing someone, like this dude is possessed by something bad. Now at number 2 is Pope Sergius III. Now this dude was the Bishop of Rome and the ruler of the Papal States. He succeeded by apparently murdering his 2 predecessors, Leo V and Christopher. If that wasn't horrendous enough, he was also having an affair with this teenage noblewoman called Marozia, who happened to be his cousin's daughter. But that's a whole other can of worms that I'm not gonna open. The two ended up having an illegitimate child called John, who went on to become Pope John XI. Italy was not doing well economically, societally, and the people wanted to use the papacy for money. Top jobs in the Vatican started being auctioned off like nothing, and the papacy started entering its dark century under Pope Sergius. Like, do I even have to mention everything that's wrong with this pope? I don't think I do. And finally, at number 1 is Pope Boniface VIII. Born in 1230, this pope was apparently so evil that Dante personally reserved a spot in the 8th circle of hell for him. There were so many disputes about his election, and those disputes manifested in a battle taking place in the Italian city of Palestrina. He oversaw the utter destruction of the city, like he literally ordered a plow to be driven over it. Nothing but rubble was left. He massacred the town and killed a lot of people despite having promised them they'd be safe. They surrendered, which they did. And don't even get me started on his celibacy, because he would have a menage a trois with literally everyone he met. Once he even did it with his mum and her daughter. His personal favorite was young males, however, no surprise there. That is This guy was just a complete douchebag, and no, he wasn't possessed by a demon, but clearly he was possessed by Satan or a Roman Emperor Julius Caesar based on his actions.
Number 10. Jason Brian Dalton. Some people think that demons and possession usually happens at a crossroads or maybe even with a Ouija board, but this is the 21st century. Jason Brian Dalton blamed it on his phone. He was an Uber driver, and on the evening of February 20th, he used a weapon to take the lives of multiple people. Dalton said that when he opened up the Uber app, he was presented with the symbol of the Eastern Star, which represents God on Earth. But apparently it wasn't God communicating with him through the phone, as he says that an image of the devil's head appeared on his screen, which he describes as looking like a cow with horns. He said that from that night he could barely remember anything, except that the devil would apparently tell him where to go and whose lives to take, saying that it was like the devil completely took over his body and mind. Then when police apprehended him, he said that the screen on his phone went from black to red, and that the devil was no longer in control after that point. Number 9. Arnie Johnson. It's impossible to go through any discussion about this topic without talking about this one specific case, and I'm sure you were all expecting to hear it, so let's get it out of the way. In 1981, a man named Arnie Johnson killed his landlord, and the events went on to inspire the movie The Conjuring: The Devil Made Me Do It. Before the night of the crime, Arnie's fiance's brother appeared to become possessed by the devil, speaking in strange languages and his eyes turning black, among other things. As time went on, Arnie would start taunting the demon, telling him to leave the brother alone and take him instead. He then went to investigate a spooky well and supposedly saw a demon, who took over his body and committed the crime. When he went on trial, his team pleaded not guilty by reason of demonic possession. A pretty bold move. Of course, the judge didn't accept this, and Arnie was sentenced, only ending up serving about 5 years before he was released and married his fiancée. Number 8. Pazuzu Algarad. In North Carolina, a man going by the name of Pazuzu Algarad was arrested after it was discovered he had been burying bodies of his victims. He had taken on the name Pazuzu in reference to the demon from The Exorcist, and had even undergone some strange body modification, making his tongue forked and sharpening his teeth. If that's already not weird enough for you, the man who was at the property when the bodies were discovered had a lot to say about Algarad. He said that the man was possessed by demons and that they would take over his body about once a month, usually around a full moon. He described it as being very serpentine and said that the man's eyes would get glazy, saying it was like the inner part of the man would fade away. And he also said that Algarad would sacrifice animals once a month. The interior of the home was also terrifying, as the walls were apparently covered in graffiti and dark symbols, and the building was deemed unsafe for human life. Number 7. Pamela Frenette. In Norfolk, Virginia, 2 police officers were called to the scene after receiving reports of a man screaming and yelling in the street, and it didn't end when they got there. The man apparently swore at the police and assaulted them, even biting one of the officers on the hand. Pretty strange, but I'm sure we've all bitten someone at some point, right? Well, it gets just a little bit weirder. A woman named Pamela Frenette is apparently the wife of the man who had attacked the officers, and had apparently been begging them not to hurt him despite his actions. She said that her husband hadn't been in his right mind because he had been possessed by a demon. Pamela said that she had even managed to catch the demon on camera and knew that it had possessed her husband, saying, "I caught it on camera, a demon, it really was, so I figured that's what got him." Unfortunately, I couldn't really find much more information on this other than the original report, so we may never know just what Pamela actually saw that day. Number 6. Tommy Smith. In February of 2015, a young man named Tommy Smith saw a car that he wanted, and he wanted it bad. Instead of, say, saving up money and purchasing it, he instead decided to steal the keys from the 65-year-old man driving the car. But when the man wouldn't give in, Smith got angry, attacking him with a weapon so aggressively that he even managed to snap it in half. Fortunately, the elderly man was able to survive but suffered serious physical and mental damage as a result. When Smith went on trial for the attack, he said that he had started suffering from hallucinations a few weeks before the crime took place, and had actually been possessed by a demon at the time of the attack. Similar to Arnie Johnson, the court didn't want to hear it and noted the young man's history of schizophrenia. He ended up being charged but didn't go to jail, instead being sent to a mental hospital until they saw fit for him to be released. Number 5. David Berkowitz. Throughout the 1970s, a man named David Berkowitz terrorized New York City. After already becoming a serial arsonist, he apparently started to hear the voices of demons in his head telling him to commit crimes. When he moved to a new home, he started to believe that his neighbors and their dogs were possessed by demons. And when he moved to a new apartment in the same area, his neighbor was a retiree named Sam, who he believed was a powerful demon. Sam's dog named Harvey was also apparently a demon, and Berkowitz believed that the dog was telling him to kill. His neighbor's name of Sam is also how he got his later name, which was Son of Sam. Soon after, people were turning up dead and police were trying to figure out who it was. During a break from the crimes, Berkowitz wrote a note to the New York Post that said, "I am still here like a spirit roaming the night, thirsty, hungry, seldom stopping to rest." He was eventually caught for the crimes and received a whopping 365 years in prison, where he apparently became a born-again Christian. Number 4. Nikolai Golubiak. Of course, things like this don't just happen in America, so let's head over to Russia in August of 2008. In a forest outside of a Russian town, 4 bodies were discovered, all seemingly having gone through something pretty terrible. It turned out that the crime had been committed by 6 self-proclaimed Satanists, the group being led by a man named Nikolai. They believed that human sacrifices were required to please Lucifer, or the devil, and the crime had been a part of an initiation ritual. The bodies had been discovered only 250 meters from Nikolai's own home, and one of the bodies had a sheet of paper that contained 101 rules of the Satanists. The young man received 20 years in prison, while the rest of the members of the group received various different charges ranging from 8 to 10 years. This isn't the first time that a crime has been committed for the sake of a ritual or cult, and it certainly won't be the last. Number 3. Cody Lott. Over the years, men have been known to do crazy things over unrequited love, and this story is especially tragic. 2 young women were walking down a footpath in September of 2016 when they were approached by a man in a car. That man was named Cody Lott. He then attacked both the girls with a weapon, only one of them surviving the event. At his trial that took place 2 years later in 2018, Lott claimed that he had actually spoken with the devil, and that the devil had even helped him to plan the attack, saying it was due to one of the girls having a boyfriend and his own frustration over not having been able to find a romantic partner. Due to these claims, he was found mentally unfit to stand trial and sent to the maximum security unit of a Texas mental hospital. After he was released and was able to stand trial, he was was sentenced to life in prison. Oddly, his parents then sued the state of Wichita to get the weapon used in the crime back, saying it had been stolen from their apartment, so I guess it was pretty important to them. Number 2. Louis Zambrano. On September 10th, 2015, in Queens, New York, a body was discovered. It was the body of Angie Escobar, who had apparently died after being attacked with a pair of scissors, reportedly having been there for about 4 days before she was found. Police were quick to find a suspect, arresting the woman's short-term boyfriend, Louis Zambrano, who had attempted to run away to Virginia. When put on trial, he claimed that he had 2 reasons for the attack. 1. Demonic possession, and number 2. Trust issues. One of these things is not like the other. Everyone who heard his declaration was disgusted, both the victim's family and the judge calling him out on his ridiculous claim, believing he was clearly using it as a poor excuse. He was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison, also receiving an extra 3 years for an unrelated burglary charge. And I wonder if that one was the devil's fault too. Number 1. Michael Taylor. A lot of people think that exorcisms are a thing of the past, but they're most definitely not. The Archdiocese of Indianapolis reportedly receiving around 1,700 exorcism requests in the year of 2018 alone. Back in 1974, an exorcism took place in England, the possessed man being Michael Taylor. He had joined a church and allegedly started having an affair with the congregation leader, Marie Robinson. During the time they spent together, Taylor went from a seemingly happy man to a more angry and irritable one, until eventually the two were caught naked together and Taylor blamed it on an evil presence or demon that was within him. A vicar was called in to perform an exorcism on him, and in October of that year, they reportedly expelled a whopping 40 demons from his body. Despite them believing that there were still 3 evil demons inside him, they let him go on his way. And only a few years later, he was found covered in blood, and he said it was the blood of Satan himself. Well, it was actually the blood of his wife, him having taken her life. Taylor was put on trial but was found not guilty due to reason of insanity.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot we have Ariana Grande. This is a terrifying paranormal encounter had by the super sweet Ariana Grande. Back in the Yours Truly era for the star, while in Kansas City, she and some friends took a visit to Stull Cemetery, which legend claims is one of the gates to hell on earth. This turned out to be a more haunting visit than the group had bargained for, however, as the singer recounted that suddenly they, quote, felt this sick, overwhelming feeling of negativity over the whole car, and we smelled sulfur, which is the sign of a demon, and there was a fly in the car randomly, which is another sign of a demon. I rolled down the window before we left and said, "We apologize, we didn't mean to disrupt your peace." Things only got more spooky for Ari though when she later tried to send her manager a picture of the cemetery. This photo she attempted to send came back with an error saying that the file couldn't be sent due to the fact that it was 666 megabytes. In our number 9 spot today we have Miley Cyrus. In an interview with LUK, Miley Cyrus opened up about a haunted apartment that she and her family stayed in during her 2009 European tour. She said, quote, "It was seriously so terrifying. It used to be an old bakery and they turned it into an apartment building, and I was having really crazy dreams and really scary things, and one night my little sister, it sounds crazy to tell you, but she was standing in the shower and all of a sudden I hear her scream. I run in there and the water had somehow flipped to hot, but it wasn't like the water had just changed, the knob had turned, but she hadn't turned it and it was burning her. She was really red." She continued on with the chilling tale by saying, quote, "Before I felt this, I thought I had seen a little boy sitting on the sink watching me take a shower, so I felt really freaked out. I was sitting there the next night, and maybe I'm crazy, but I could have sworn I could see this little boy sitting there on the sink kicking his feet. My mom was getting mad that we were looking into it because she thought it was going to scare Noah, so then my aunt, who we hadn't told about this, comes in and she starts freaking out. She's like, I have no idea what happened, but I left the apartment and I came back and all of the doors and windows were open. I locked the apartment." She finished off her creepy story by saying that there were a few more strange things that happened, and this all was enough for her to swear off ever staying in that place again. Miley believes the haunting ties back into the history of the building and says that the apparition she saw matches up with who once lived there. In our number 8 spot spot today we have Adele. The haunting story of Adele starts off when she decided that she had had enough of fans and paparazzi outside of her London home, so she decided to purchase and move to a new home in Sussex. This house, in its past life before housing the Grammy Award winner, is said to have been a convent. Despite the change, Adele continued to be visited by people she didn't want in her home, but this time the visitors were otherworldly. The singer claimed that she began to hear noises that she was unable to find the source of. Things in her home also began to fall for seemingly no apparent reason, and apparently these paranormal encounters made Adele so unsettled that she had to hire a bodyguard to stay in her house full time. Hopefully these plaguing hauntings have since stopped, but only Adele knows for sure. In our number 7 spot today we have Ozzy Osbourne. One of the most famous rock stars ever, Ozzy has long been connected to the occult. I mean, Ozzy, Prince of Darkness, didn't just come from nowhere. Aside from the rumors, however, Ozzy has been fairly open about his personal connection to the devil. In a 1984 issue of Hit Parader, Ozzy said, quote, "I really wish I knew why I've done some of the things I've done over the years. Sometimes I think that I'm possessed by some outside spirit. A few years ago, I was convinced of that. I thought I truly was possessed by the devil. I remember sitting through The Exorcist a dozen times, saying to myself, yeah, I can relate to that." He even has expressed confusion over whether or not if he's a medium for some kind of outside source or if something much more sinister is at play. When speaking of actually selling his soul, Ozzy had some less than comforting things to say. He said, quote, "I already have. Well, you sell your soul to the devil when you do something yourself that you shouldn't, and I already have. I've lived my life to the fullest. If there's an afterlife, I've got a good spot in the furnace. You know?" In our number 6 spot today we have Post Malone. Good old Posty has probably one of the most famous celebrity haunting stories, and it all started with a visit to ghost hunter Zach Bagans' museum. Within the museum was an old wine box that is said to hold a Dybbuk, which in Jewish mythology is a malicious demon. This box had come to the museum after the previous owner bought it on eBay and had some really horrible things happen to him and his family afterwards. These included reports of him having really horrific nightmares, and this extended to anyone else who touched the box, and sometimes even those who had just been around it. Even worse, his own mother had a serious medical emergency after he had given this box to her. This is all to say the haunted item showed up in the Bagan Museum, and then 2018 rolled around and Post Malone decided to take a haunting tour of the occult collection. During this tour, Post Malone reached out and touched the box, and, well, he has been dealing with the consequences ever since. These are said to include the same horrific nightmares detailed by the box's previous owner. In our number 5 spot today we have Bob Dylan. Not necessarily who I really expected to put on this list, but there was an interesting interview back in 2014 that made many people speculate that the musician might have actually sold his soul. In the interview he was explaining that he owes his years of fame and success to a deal he made. The interviewer asked, "Why are you still out here?" To which Dylan replied, "It goes back to that destiny thing. I made a bargain with it. You know, long time ago, and I'm holding up my end." The interviewer of course had to follow up on that cryptic message, so he said, "What was your bargain?" And he replied, "To get where I am now." The interviewer asked, "Should I ask who you made the bargain with?" And he replied, "With the chief commander." The interviewer clarified, "On this earth?" To which he answered, "In this earth and in a world we can't see." I can totally see why some people decided to draw their own conclusions from this. I mean, it sounds like he's basically speaking in riddles, so while he doesn't outright say that he sold his soul, some believe that this is what he was trying to say in that interview. In our number 4 spot today we have Mike Colter. You might know Mike Colter as he plays Luke Cage in the MCU, but what you might not know about the actor is a very ghostly encounter that he had. Back in 2019, Mike was on Kelly Clarkson's show, and while on the show, he had an eerie tale for the audience when he said, quote, "I'm from the South, and there's a lot of things that happened in the South that don't happen anywhere else." Of course, Kelly inquired further, and that is when the star revealed a reoccurring moment that he claims happened, quote, "night after night." His mother basically explained it to him as a spirit being attracted to his energy. He said, quote, "When I was a kid, I used to have this thing that was sitting on my chest when I would sleep, and it was keeping me from getting up, and I couldn't open my eyes, and I would struggle." I don't know about you guys, but that sounds absolutely horrifying. I know a couple demons that could match up with that. Maybe it's a sleep paralysis demon, who knows. In our number 3 spot today we have Vanessa Hudgens. Just last year in April of 2022, Vanessa appeared on the Kelly Clarkson show. I guess everyone's just on the Kelly Clarkson show talking about their paranormal experience. And during this appearance, she spoke about having, quote, a lot of paranormal encounters over the years. She said, quote, I kind of shut it down for a while because the unknown is scary, but I recently was like, no, this is a gift and something that I have the ability to do, so I'm going to lean into it. Expanding on how she is leaning into these abilities, she explained that she had actually recently completed her first real paranormal investigation. Now we have Ed, Lorraine, and Vanessa. During this investigation, she said she met a very playful ghost at the site of a cemetery. I mean, I guess it's not like a malicious spirit. She said that she was able to speak to this ghost using a spirit box, and that after introducing herself, the ghost replied and repeated the names back to her. Maybe this year we'll see Vanessa diving even further into the paranormal, the occult, and all of these otherworldly beings. In our number 2 spot today we have Courtney Cox. Back in March 2022, former Friends star Courtney Cox shared a harrowing experience she had that led her to go as far as to sell her house. She said, quote, I didn't believe at first, but I lived in this house in Laurel Canyon, which is in LA, obviously, and it was Gypsy Rose Lee's house and Carole King's. She went on to say, quote, so Carole King came over to my house and she said that there had been a divorce that was really ugly and that there was a ghost in the house. And I was like, yeah, whatever. But other people would stay there with me, like friends of mine, and they said they felt an encounter with a woman who was sitting on the edge of the bed. Despite these tales from her friends and even doing an actual seance with Carole, Courtney still wasn't really a believer of the supernatural. This all did eventually change, however, and it happened when a UPS worker came to her house. Quote, I was at the house one day, not being a believer. The doorbell rang, it was a UPS guy or something, and I opened the door and he said, do you know this house is haunted? And I go, yeah, why? Why do you think that? And he goes, because there's someone standing behind you. And I was like, let's sell. She said she quickly put the house up for sale. After that, and that she, quote, couldn't sleep there alone ever again. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have Cynthia Rowley. So there was a show called Celebrity Ghost Stories, and in an episode, Cynthia Rowley showed up to share her haunting tale. The designer recalled a spooky tale that took place at her estate, which is located in Greenwich, Connecticut. She explained that there was a, quote, ghost-like feeling in the house, which certainly is an eerie feeling, but soon a feeling turned into something a little bit more tangible. Eventually, Cynthia began seeing a sort of apparition in the corner of a room in the home. This apparition appeared as a woman who was wearing a sort of scarf over her face. This is all chilling enough, but things only got worse when Cynthia had to escape a fire in her home. She did, thankfully, and was fine, but then the local fire chief told her something she hadn't previously known. The woman who once owned the home she now lived in was called the, quote, Diamond Match Heiress, who was badly burned in a blaze. Seems like Cynthia may have been haunted by the previous owner of the house, and not just in like a tacky decor kind of way, I mean like for real haunted.